I'd like to say good morning to everyone and welcome to our session this morning. We are very happy to have you join us this morning. In this breakout session, we want to make sure you're in the right one. Empowering Black girls, addressing policies and practices that diminish and harm their potential. My name is Dr. Tanya Fisher, and I will serve as your moderator this morning. Our focus for this session is near and dear to my heart, as I'm sure it is to yours as well. And that's probably why you're here this morning. So I want to thank everyone for attending and participating today. As we begin, I'd like to provide you an overview of how things will go and also to introduce our facilitator and our panelists. I would like to first begin by introducing our facilitator, Africa Mills. We'd like to thank you for your time and service this morning, and she will be supporting us with any technical issues and be monitoring the chat feature for any questions. Due to limited time this morning, we may not be able to respond to all of the questions. However, the session is being recorded and we will work to provide responses to questions that we're not able to answer through our post-session response on the CAAASA website. Africa, would you like to make any other comments referencing
I just really want to say welcome to everyone. So excited to have you all here. I know I already saw in the chat that some folks are here from the sessions we did earlier in the year. So happy to see you all. And just like Dr. Fisher said, I'm here monitoring the chat. I'll make sure that you receive the resources you need, including the survey that we really hope that you fill out because feedback is vital. We really want to make sure we're meeting your needs as participants. And I'll also drop the link to returning to the main closing session at the end. So just kind of keep an eye on the chat. But yeah, I'll be in the chat, and if you have any questions, just go ahead and submit them there.
Well, thank goodness somebody can handle the technical situations because that's not my role. All right. Well, at this time, I'd like to introduce and again thank each of our panelists for joining us today. And after framing our conversation, I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly share their insights and experiences integrating some of the questions that I will introduce shortly. So right now, I'm just going to introduce you and then I'll frame our conversation. I'd like to begin by introducing and welcoming Dr. Jamilia Blake, professor at Texas A&M University. Hi. And then I'd like to introduce Dr. Kathi Elliot, CEO of Gwen's Girls. I'm looking forward to hearing more about Gwen's Girls. Senator Holly Mitchell will be joining us. I'm not seeing her yet, but she will be joining us from State Senate District, 30th State Senate District. And Dr. Monique Morris, Executive Director, Grantmakers of Girls of Color. So thank you to all of our illustrious and distinguished panelists this morning. As we engage in our conversation, I want to begin with an African quote that says, "If you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate a nation." I would like to add to this quote by saying, if you educate and empower a girl, you educate and empower a nation. We all know about Black girl magic, and we know that girls rule the world, right? So I would like for us to address a few specific questions as you frame your topic this morning. I would ask for each of you to just briefly share your background and your work around focusing on Black girls and any unique challenges that they may face. Through your experiences, can you address any societal issues, policies, or practices that may positively or negatively impact the empowerment of Black girls? And then what are any direct action steps that we might take as a community of supporters to develop the potential and empowerment of Black girls? So I want you to come from your own special place, but try to hit some of those topic areas. You'll each have about 10 minutes to kind of share from your perspective. I want you to be able to flow. and then we'll try to leave some time for any questions toward the end. Is that okay? All right, I'm going to ask that we begin our panel discussion this morning with Dr. Blake. If you can share from your perspective and integrate some of those questions in your
Absolutely.
response.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm excited to be here. Dr. Jamilia Blake, I'm a professor at A&M. I'm also a licensed psychologist. And my research for my entire career has focused on Black girls and discipline disparities. And I'm also the lead researcher on a report that was released focusing on adultification bias that received a lot of national attention, some good dialogue, some great work. We have some panelists that have doing some great work as a result of that. So I'm kind of happy to see things come full circle. So one of the biggest challenges that I see empirically in my research, and also I'm a mother of 2 daughters, so and I'm a Black woman, right? So my lived experiences, having conversations with Black women and Black girls, looking at it amongst my own daughters, is this concept of adultification bias, of this idea that Black girls are not seen as children. They're not allowed to make mistakes. They're not allowed to exhibit that joy and be free because we are, as women, as young girls, hypersexualized. Because of racism, we're discriminated. It's every behavior is seen as negative. You have an attitude, your clothing doesn't fit right, it's not appropriate. And so because, my youngest daughter, can I live, Mom? Because Black girls don't get to live, because they don't get that freedom to exhale, because they're not seen as children, when adults, educators, mental health professionals, juvenile justice individuals are interacting with Black girls, they don't get that benefit of the doubt. And they're more likely to respond to them in overly punitive ways. And that punitiveness comes from this idea to kind of control and police and surveil their bodies. And something I would like to leave the audience, and I wish we had more time for discussion, is we tend to view this as white teachers doing this to Black girls, but we need to talk about more broadly how the community does this and the language we are using to describe Black girls' behavior when their behavior is developmentally appropriate. But we're seeing it as not being appropriate. So a term that I often hear a lot, I grew up hearing it, she's so fast. She's so fast, she thinks she's so grown. Well, maybe she's just mature. Maybe she's inquisitive, maybe she's assertive. So I always, when I do these talks, want to challenge us in the language we use, because our words have power. And if we're talking about empowering Black girls, then let's not use disempowering language. It does not mean that Black girls are above correction. It does not mean that we can guide them, but we need to think about the root of where some of those words come from. And it's a historical legacy of slavery, right? We also hypersexualize ourselves and our children by, a little kid mimics what someone dancing, they're watching, oh, they so fast. Well, no, kids mimic what they see. And they don't have any meaning attached to those behaviors. It is the adults who are attaching meaning to those behaviors. Right. And so we really need to talk about that as a community and unpack that and not contribute into the adultification bias that is perpetuated in these systems. I'm trying to watch my time because I can talk. The next thing that I want to,
you're good.
That's really what my work speaks to, and that's really my passion. And that's really how this adultification bias research came out, because I was doing work on Black girls being over disciplined and suspended, and it was going against everything that I knew personally, that the research speaks. Black women, Black girls, we're high achieving, we excel in all areas, right? And so why were these Black girls being over suspended? Because these stereotypes about Black women were being mapped upon them, and their behaviors were seen as more problematic, as opposed to things that needed some mild correction. They needed to be policed. But I want to talk about something that has hit me on my heart that just came about this morning, because a lot of times when I talk about my work, I talk about educating teachers, educating superintendents, educating administrators, and that's how we're really going to tackle this problem. It's not the kids, but it's those of us who provide the supports. But US Newsweek just released a report that President Trump, right, is really moving to ban any kind of diversity related training that has certain elements in school systems. And my concern about that is if we don't know the law, that this may force administrators, because no one wants the feds after them. Black people, white people, no one wants the feds in their business, so to speak. No school wants to have the feds looking at them. But if the U.S. Department of Education moves forward with this, right, it will have inadvertent effects on administrators, which will disempower Black girls, because what I'm afraid of is that we won't get the training that our educators need because they're fearful of the repercussions. And that is to me, that is very pressing, because we have made so many strides in terms of acknowledging the unique challenges that Black girls are facing. You know, I always say Black girls have been hiding in plain sight. They've been struggling with these issues for over 40 years. And we have a momentum, just this panel alone, right? In the last 5 years, we got a momentum. We're a train, we're unstoppable. And we've all talked about education. And you'll hear that, I'm sure, from my colleagues echoed. But this coming out from our president to discourage this kind of training, I think is going to really negatively impact all children. It's also going to negatively impact teachers. You have the potential to grow here, right? But it's certainly going to impact Black girls. So with that, I think that's my time. So I will mute myself.
If you have more to say, you have about 3 more minutes, but no pressure.
No, because I can't condense it. I just start getting passionate, and I'll just keep talking.
Okay.
Well, I certainly feel your passion, and certainly do appreciate your pivotal work that has contributed to this much needed area of focus. I want to take a few moments to welcome Senator Holly Mitchell, who's joined the illustrious panel this morning. Thank you for being here, Senator Mitchell. I heard your comments, and we can't wait to hear more about that Crown Act during your presentation on the panel.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be a part of this panel and was very happy to hear the last presentation. I can't wait. Thank you.
Definitely. So we're going to move on to our second panelist. I believe that's going to be Dr. Morris. Was she scheduled to go second? My notes are scribbling.
I am. I'm ready.
Okay, take it away. All right.
Okay. Good morning, everyone in California. I want to say that I am the first executive director of Grantmakers for Girls of Color. I am the founder and past president of the National Black Women's Justice Institute, the author of Push Out, The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools, and Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, Education for the Liberation of Black and Brown Girls. Also the executive producer, co-writer of the Push Out documentary. I was a student in California, someone who's born and raised in California. I've taught in California, and I worked with the Alameda County Office of Education to launch a program we called Emerge, which is an educational reentry program for girls who have experienced school push out and other forms of significant disruption in their educational journey. I'm the mother of daughters who were primarily raised in California, and one that's still being educated in California. So I wanted to share all of that in my introduction to demonstrate to you how important it was for me to be a part of this conversation that's taking place in my home state, and to really try to offer a couple of things that I think are critical in our discussion about how we build out safe spaces for Black girls in the state, where our numbers are so few, but our pain is so great. Much of my work has really revolved around mapping the conditions and experiences of Black girls in schools. Much of that work was based in California. Much of how I've talked about this has been in the context of exploring where Black girls are situated and what we've come to understand as the school to prison pipeline. I call it school to confinement pathways, largely inviting us into a conversation about how the policies, practices, conditions, and the prevailing consciousness, so what we think about Black girls informs their risk of future contact with the juvenile court or criminal legal system. Dr. Blake has done an excellent job, I think, just teasing us with the work that she's been doing on adultification. I think that work has really been pivotal in framing some of the conversations that we're having about Black girls and their unique risks in our schools and in our communities. That study that she led with the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality found that Black girls were experiencing adults reading their behaviors as more adult-like when they're as young as age 5, and it peaks when they're between the ages of 10 and 14, meaning that when we're thinking about girls in our middle schools as they're entering high schools, not only are they experiencing early onset puberty, but they're experiencing this hyper-punitive learning space in many cases, right at a time when people are seeing them as less in need of nurturing, in need of less protection. You know, some of the things that, again, she said we attribute to white educators that sometimes we have internalized through our internalized oppressions and continue to project upon our girls. You know, the work that I have done has really also been about exploring how this adultification and how the work that we've done in talking directly to Black girls about their educational journeys has led to a failure for us to respond to their trauma. That we know so many Black girls are experiencing sexual violence at higher rates. They're experiencing poverty and other forms of victimization and bias that are dehumanizing in so many ways at disproportionately high rates. But when they act out in ways that, you know, as Dr. Blake mentioned, might be developmentally appropriate, we see that as problematic behavior and sort of respond to her in alignment with some of the very deeply racialized, you know, stereotypes and tropes that lead us to understand them as hypersexual, lead us to understand them as loud and aggressive, that lead us to understand them as somehow a problematic figure in the classroom or in schools, rather than really projecting upon them the invitation that I offer, which is that they are sacred and loved, and responding accordingly. You know, the unique challenges that Black girls are experiencing really are wrapped around the historical trauma, the racialized gender oppression, the specific anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism that is demonstrated throughout curricula, that is demonstrated in their learning spaces, that provides, you know, minimal opportunity for them to respond and feel safe enough to be whole and in community in so many of their learning spaces, which is something that, you know, I think many of our schools have been trying for, you know, that we, you know, begin to address this issue is mapped out pretty heavily in Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, Education for the Liberation of Black and Brown Girls, and also in the work that we were doing with Emerge in Alameda County, which was really about seeing, you know, what happens if instead of us spending so much time in our schools talking about punishment, we shift our lens to explore how we then, you know, engage with girls through a lens of healing. What if schools could become locations for healing first, and then that could be the basis for them becoming the locations for learning that we intend them to be? And so that, you know, for me has been a critical inquiry. I think it's an open inquiry in many ways, but there are schools that are doing tremendous work to advance us into that realm of possibility. Schools that have embraced restorative practices and approaches, not just as an alternative to suspension, but really, and also not just using a single modality of the circle. Like a lot of times when we talk about restorative practice and engagement, we think if we're not sitting in a circle, it's not restorative. To limit our capacity to heal in that way means that we are not fully responding to the great possibility and infinite wisdom that already exists in so many Black communities and in Black girl bodies and traditions. And so, you know, a lot of the work that I've been exploring is how we then come to understand, you know, sort of Black girl magic in the context of double dutch, how we see that as a healing practice. How do we see when Black girls express themselves and advocate for their communities as a part of their healing? I was part of a webinar just a few days ago where new research that's done by Girls Leadership demonstrated that Black and brown girls are ready to lead, but that their leadership skills are really underutilized in our nation's schools. When girls on the panel were talking about what they want to lead, much of their conversation was about equity. So they were strong Black girls who were leading conversations about justice and equity in schools. And that was probably the limitation that they had with respect to how people engage their leadership, rather than understanding that, you know, to only hold Black girls in a space where they can only be the spokespersons around race, only be the ones leading the march, only being the ones who can talk about these questions of equity and justice, really doesn't invite us and them into conversations about, you know, sort of where they want to see themselves as developed more fully in this conversation about leadership. The other thing about that is when Black girls do assert their leadership, sometimes we use it as permission to adultify them, to add on to the responsibilities that they have, or to project upon them certain expectations that we might have about the role that they play in schools. They're still kids, they're still learning, they're still developing. And so it's important for us to consider how we use our power as adults and school leaders to invest in the increasing of their capacity to lead, rather than thinking about this as a way to further the societal harm of adultification, or further the societal harm of rendering them vulnerable to certain tropes about their identities. The other thing I'll say is that, you know, in part of the work that I found that, you know, tend to be working to combat some of these issues of school push out, I found that schools that, so fundamentally, I just want to say schools that understand that you need a robust continuum and alternative to exclusionary discipline are the safer schools. That safety is not something that you implement. So I am an advocate for the removal of police in schools, because we don't need police in schools. What we need are school leaders and other adults in schools that can help foster the safety, emotional safety, community safety, and intellectual safety that our girls need to show up and realize their identity as scholars. The policing in schools renders them vulnerable to increased levels of citations, the rendering or reading of their bodies in sexual ways, the sort of priorities that we place on the sort of surveillance of their bodies in ways that can reinforce rape culture, and especially for survivors of sexual violence that we know Black girls are disproportionately among. You know, that can have some deeply problematic, you know, consequences, and is not a part of, you know, sort of our overarching strategy to try to engage them in a healing space. I'll offer too, you know, that now that I am in philanthropy, and I'm going to wrap it up. I know I was like, okay. Now that I'm in philanthropy, I just want to offer, and I hope we have a chance to talk a bit about philanthropy's role in supporting education. Because I do think that there are specific ways that we should invest in organic peer leadership among young people, and that much of our conversations as school leaders, as, you know, those in policy spaces, you know, that we're talking about how we create and cultivate a structure for us to be engaged. We've also got to think about the participatory work and wisdom of the girls themselves. And I'll just finally offer that I was part of a community that has been working with policymakers. And so I'm super glad that Senator Mitchell is on this panel, because I had the honor of working with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar at the national level to bring us the Ending Pushout Act of 2019 that is about funding and cultivating learning spaces that respond to trauma. And there's absolutely a policy perspective and role in this, both at the federal level, but also at the state level in creating safe spaces for our young people. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
We appreciate you and all of your work and all of your wisdom. And we are so honored to have you as a part of this conversation. And I like the things that you said relative to healing and learning and creating spaces for that to happen. And then how do we build bridges with philanthropic organizations for sustainability and impact? So thank you so much, Dr. Morris, for your contribution. We'd like to move to our third panelist at this time and ask Senator Mitchell to share from her perspective experiences around empowerment of Black girls and her contributions to our topic this morning. Welcome, Senator Mitchell.
Good morning. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here. And let me just say to both Dr. Blake and Dr. Morris, you know, I'm fangirling right now. I have carried your publications literally around with me in the California Capitol. and they have been my guide in so many ways that neither of you have any idea, but just know that you got a fangirl in California, in the California State Senate. A couple of things, I think in terms of my lane as a state policymaker, a couple of things that I feel passionately that, it's my role to help support educators and support Black girls in the way that I can. And a couple of things I've noticed, it's impacted by the adultification reality. And it's in the criminal justice space, the juvenile justice space, and in foster care. I carried a bill a number of years ago with my colleague, then State Senator Ricardo Lara, who's now our insurance commissioner. It was a package of bills we called #Equity and Justice, because it became clear and clear to me that as a state, we were criminalizing childhood. And of course, Black children, brown children, and poor children were getting the brunt of that. And as we began to look at specific policies that impacted Black girls disproportionately, we knew they existed because Black girls are at a higher rate represented in our foster care system and our juvenile justice system compared to their population. And so, for example, I introduced a bill a number of years ago to decriminalize prostitution for underage victims of sex trafficking. I'm going to say that one more time because I want people to hear the words, and then I'm going to tell you how it was interpreted and the problem I saw. The bill decriminalized prostitution for underage victims of sex trafficking. Now, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, my Republican colleagues, interpreted that as me legalizing prostitution. And what occurred to me is that they didn't see Black girls as victims when they were, that even though the bill is specifically addressed underage victims, because we all know you can't consent to sex until you're 18. So how was it that these 13, 14, 15-year-old victims of sex trafficking were being charged with prostitution? That doesn't make sense. And being charged with prostitution means that they then had a rap sheet that would grow, that would then lead from victim state to convict state, juvenile hall, and we know the rest. The fact that my colleagues just couldn't frame in their minds that these young Black girls were actually victims and they felt deserved to be charged with prostitution was mind-blowing. We had every DA in the state against the bill, every law enforcement organization, and as we continue to make the argument that it would never occur to us to charge a white female adult rape victim with prostitution, why did they think it was appropriate to charge these young girls of color as such? We got the bill through. We actually had one DA, the Alameda County District Attorney, who came around and supported us. But that's just one example from my perspective of how the adultification of Black girls permeates not only school-based policy and experiences, but public policy. There were thousands of girls across this state who were victims of sex trafficking who now were subject to the criminal justice system as well. I think when we looked at a number of policies that led to the disproportionate number of Black girls in public systems, it really stems from this perception of who we are. And I absolutely agree with Dr. Morris, the fact that we have not validated and acknowledged the trauma that they've experienced, the trauma that all of us as Black women know we experienced growing up as Black women in this country. When we look at our foster care system and the number of Black girls who then age out of the system because they have quote unquote failed reunification, they have failed successful placements. Black girls are disproportionately placed in group home settings. And we know congregate care and shift care is not the way, it does not mimic a family setting. And so when Black girls find themselves in group home settings versus foster family homes, therein lies yet another barrier to them being able to mature, find love, and nurture. when we did our research in terms of the group homes in California and the young people who were being overprescribed psychotropic medications, again, Black girls were at the top of the list. This isn't scientific because I'm not like Dr. Blake and Dr. Morris, but this is the work we did in terms of really trying to do our public policy work to unpack these issues that were disproportionately impacting Black girls. And when we looked at the vast majority of the counties, 58 counties in California across the state, and then there was a financial benefit to Black girls being in group homes because of the reimbursement rates to the providers. So it's a real, yes, exactly. And then for the providers to then have them prescribed with medications, then they become easy, you know, because if they are, quote, acting out, because they've experienced trauma, because we haven't done the job we need to do to make sure that we do the assessments on the front end and place them in the right placement in the first place, and then they bounce around. It was easier to then medicate them than to provide appropriate programming in the group home setting. Again, Black girls at the top of that list. So the work you all have done is important in school settings and outside school settings, but I think it's also important for school administrators to deeply understand the life experience of girls outside of your school setting, to recognize the numbers that are in foster care, to recognize the signs of those who may be victims of sex trafficking, to recognize those that may be victims of poverty. Poverty is the #1 driver of kids entering foster care. And so it's really important, I think, that all of us make a pledge to ourselves, whatever the sector we work in, that we are going to see Black girls in a different light and do all that we can to provide nurture and care. Very quickly, I'll go back to the Crown Act, which was so deeply personal to me, not only because I'm locked and have been for 16 years, but because of the number of Black girls that were being pushed out of school settings, not for any fault of their own. This notion, and we saw the suspension records and the letters sent home. The parents sent them to us by the dozens because these girls were deemed a distraction to others based on the fact that their mothers chose to send them to school in box braids or twists, to embrace their natural hair, and to attempt to pour into them at a very young age that they are perfect just the way they are. And so this bill is not just about hair, and it's not superficial in that way from my perspective. It is really about, from a very early age, letting young girls know that we see them and that we are going to change these backwards societal norms that suggest only that a Eurocentric standard of straight hair is what's beautiful, acceptable, and appropriate in learning settings and in professional settings. And let me be clear, this bill is not about pitting us as Black women against each other either. It's not about saying that sisters who still wear their hair straight that you're wrong. That is not what this bill is about. This bill is about choice, and that we were the only group of women and girls who had our choice robbed from us based on a school-based dress code or a workplace dress code. That we are we have the capacity to determine what is best for us and what's appropriate for our settings. As I tell people all the time, people who elect me, and I represent 1 million people in the state Senate, elect me and choose to vote for me based on what's inside my head, not how I choose to wear my hair. And me being locked has had no bearing on my ability to be chair of the budget committee for the 5th largest economy of the world. And so I just thank you very much for given me the opportunity, but I wanted to talk about some of those very specific examples I had with regard to how the adultification experience then permeated into us criminalizing children, and how Black girls were disproportionately impacted by that set of policy. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Wow, you spoke a word and you compacted all in. I just wanted to highlight just a couple things you said. understanding the impact and the need to change policies and legislation around what systemic issues are currently in place that really have a negative impact on our ability to cultivate the potential and promise in Black girls. And understanding the impact of life experiences. And it just brought to mind those children who were not allowed to register in school last year because they came to register in braids. I don't know if any of you saw that. I forget what state it was, but they wouldn't let them register because they came to school and their hair was in braids. So with that, now we're going to kind of shift to what we can do to kind of contribute to improving these outcomes as a community. What do we need to do? We know these are in place. So let's hear now from Dr. Elliot. Tell us a little bit about your experiences and kind of your work and Gwen's Girls, because I'm ashamed to say I don't know about Gwen's Girls.
Well,
Dr.
you're about
Elliot.
to know about us. You're
All
about
right.
to know about us.
I'm correct.
So I'm going to say good afternoon because I am here on the East Coast in Pittsburgh, and it is now 2:06. So thank you for having me. This is just a tremendous honor to be on a panel with my sheroes, Dr. Blake and Dr. Morris. I have one more who is Dr. Venus Evans-Winters, who I got to bring up in this space because she gives me life all the time. And so I'm glad to be on the panel with Senator Mitchell now, getting to know her and hear her, because everything that she talked about is exactly what we're doing here in Pittsburgh and addressing in the same way. And I think it's a national issue. We know that these issues that Black girls are facing are across our nation, but each state and city is addressing them a little bit differently. But we hope that through, again, models of what the work that Dr. Morris has provided, even Jamilia Blake, all the work that is being done, that we have examples of how to address the issues that are impacting our girls on a daily basis. And so, again, I am the CEO of Gwen's Girls. We have been in business since 2002. It was founded by my mother. She was a police commander here in the city of Pittsburgh. Saw a lot of issues that women and girls face, and just no supports and resources for them. So she started the organization. I've been the CEO for the past 5 years, and my first kind of charge was just looking at what was going on with girls in Pittsburgh. And the majority of the girls that come through our doors are Black girls because we're in communities where the need is great. We just in communities where somebody just brought up the issue of poverty, and just all the supports that are missing in our Black communities. And so once I started to surveil what was happening in this city, and particularly around Black girls, we started to look at just the systems. And so what's happening in the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, the education system. And like many people have, talked about, this disproportionate rate of Black girls and Black youth being represented in these systems. And so our first equity summit was in 2016, and it was following a report that we did that just looked at the data. We are fortunate enough in the city of Pittsburgh, and we have a county, it's Allegheny County, that we have our child welfare services as well as our juvenile probation department. They really are on board of trying to really understand what is the contributing factor of this disproportionate representation of Black children in their systems. And so they have actually been partners with us for the past 4 years, but most recently, this past year, we really took a deeper dive into the school to prison pipeline, or what are these ways that girls are being sent to the juvenile justice system. And what we found was that, there's a high rate of, we knew that there was a disproportionate rate. So here in Pittsburgh, Black girls are 10 times more likely than white girls to be referred to the juvenile justice system for the same types of crimes. So then we wanted to look at what are some of those crimes. And for 60% of those charges, they were disorderly conduct. And we all know that that is a subjective charge. And so all the things that was just talked about earlier around adultification and those subjective things about, what the girl wore to school, or what, what her behavior, she was disrespectful, that type of thing, that it's getting criminalized instead of it being seen as behavior that adolescents, you know, have and show on a regular basis. And so that led us to actually put together this report that will be actually released on Monday that highlights not only the data, but also what are some of the solutions? Like, what are our recommendations? What are the issues that the system administrators need to address? Because I'm gonna talk a few minutes about the programs that we have for girls, but I always like to start talking about, it's not just the girl. When you talk about 10 times more likely to be referred, the issues aren't just about one girl or one girl's behavior. It's indicative of systemic racial issues that, you know, permeate that system. And so we are, you know, working with the school administrators as well as the juvenile probation department, the child welfare system. And just yesterday, so we're having a town hall on Thursday, but just yesterday we all got together and it was the city police. But one that often was missing a lot of times is the teachers. So we even got the president of the teachers union to be a part of this conversation, because we know that a lot of when we were meeting with the chief of police to ask him, like, where are these referrals coming from? Like, where's this disorderly conduct? What are you seeing? And a lot of times it's like the teachers are referring or calling instead of being able to have the supports that are necessary in the schools to address an issue. And usually when you sit down and talk to the student or really understand what's happened in that situation, there's some traumatic experience, something that needs supports around it, something that doesn't need to be criminalized, but they end up calling for the school police to come and get the kid out of the classroom. And then they are, you know, missing out on their education. And then it's just a ripple effect of, you know, just ongoing need for additional support, right? So we are, you know, just happy to be able to be in a space where we have the system administrators, judges coming together to look at the data, to, you know, acknowledge, you know, what their systems contribution has been in, you know, the high rate of these referrals, but really, what are you going to do about it? Because we've you know, even recently had a report that I'm the part of the Gender Equity Commission here in the city of Pittsburgh, and we did a report that showed that Pittsburgh was the worst city for Black women in the nation, right? And so we kind of know that these issues exist. As a Black woman that has been born and raised here, I understand, you know, what this racial, you know, the racial issues are. Where we're at right now is, what are the solutions? How can we come together to really make an impact? And so one of the things that I try to do is, I don't want to highlight what the problems are without having a solution. And one of the programs that we started at Gwen's Girls was through an opportunity that we had through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and that gave us an opportunity to do a participatory research project that was about empowerment. And what we did was, first of all, educate the young ladies about everything that we just talked about, adultification. My girls are now know what adultification is. And, you know, like, you know, when situations are, you know, they're, you know, being asked to do something, or, you know, somebody is saying something about them, they are now able to put in context that, you know, that's adultification. And it is so funny. I have to text Jamilia every time when they come and they start to talk the language. But what I was seeing was, in our first conversations, because Dr. Blake had came to Gwen's Girls and did a listening session, right? And one of the things that was brought up was, you know, the girls we all internalized some of the European ways and what is beauty, but then also what is, you know, good behavior, or when you should speak up and when you shouldn't. And so some of our girls really believe some of the issues that are happening are because of them individually. And so we need to educate our young people about some of the historical issues and historical racial practices that really contribute contribute to some of the them not getting access to certain things, or them not having a laptop even though COVID hit and they still don't have access to, you know, be able to learn. There's a lot of different things that are happening in our society that our young people just sometimes don't understand, think that it's because of them, but really don't understand that it's because some of the historical things that have happened. And so that's what we have been doing in our sessions, is making sure that our girls are equipped with knowledge, not only about just historical things, but even just about themselves, because, you know, adolescence itself is a hard period for kids to go through when you're trying to explore and understand who you are. But then when you have systems and adults telling you something that really isn't aligned with who you really are, you have to, you know, be equipped with skills to be able to debunk a lot of the subscribe things that people are trying to tell our girls who they are. And lastly, we have a project called See the Best in Me, and that was developed not just for the kids, for the girls to understand how to see the best in themselves, but it's really a media project where we did billboards, and we're doing things through social media, where, you know, in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, September is Black Girls Equity Month, and every day we're having a girl with her picture and just some of her words, saying that let her know and let everybody else know that, you know, she is worthy, she is beautiful, and that she can see the best in herself. Don't always look at a Black girl and do those stereotypes that, you know, Dr. Blake talks about, of, you know, us being angry and fast and all these other things. No, we're so monolithic that we are so many different things, and so you can't put us in a box. And so I thank you for the opportunity to speak and to be here on this platform, and look forward to additional conversation.
I'm so jazzed over here. I'm just like, I'm trying to keep our time, but it's this fabulous conversation. We have about 8 minutes before we need to transition into the main session. So I don't know if if anyone had any additional comments. So I'm gonna pass it back to you, Dr. Fisher, if you wanted to.
Oh man, this is so good. How can we be at the end of our time already? I just wanted to see if there were any questions from the chat box that were burning questions that you found that needed to be addressed. And then
there's just been really a whole lot of amen and a lot of like just love in the chat. But I don't know, like Dr. Morris, if you wanted to, or Monique.
Yeah. I just want to offer, you know, I think what Gwen's Girls provides for us and provides for the nation is an opportunity to see how to make meaning of data and research in a way that can inform practice. A lot of times when we're talking about the statistics and we're talking about elevated concepts like, you know, school to confinement pathways and adultification, we lose sight of the fact that when we take that information and operationalize it in the learning, that we're able to impact not only some of the pedagogical practices that can inform how we are, you know, sort of transferring knowledge and information, but we're also providing people with the tools to take back education as a fundamental part of their own personal development and advocacy. I think, you know, so often many of our schools try to separate the advocacy from the learning in a way that is frankly culturally incompetent. And so I think what Gwen's Girls and a number of other schools that I've seen take this information and move it into practice have done really well is to establish a structure that provides for a regular engagement of this material, not a one-off, not Black History Month, not just, you know, like, let's talk about it now because it's an issue, but to really try to elevate what this issue means at its intersections and how there are different populations that are working through this material in a routine way. So I want to say that because I think, you know, she elevated that they have the equity committee. So they're having an equity policy conversation. They're doing the practice in the schools and in community. So it's not that it's a separate conversation. They're a unified conversation in many ways. And even though Pittsburgh has this dubious title of being, you know, sort of the worst place to live, you know, if you're a Black woman, it really is the best place to begin a conversation about the possibility of transformation with the proper kind of investment. So I just wanted to say that because a lot of times when we talk about program, we kind of divorce it from the research. And I think she's just done a really great job of blending the two.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Morris. And so just to elaborate just a few minutes, seconds on that is that, yes, it's a collaborative effort. And that's the point that I was trying to make, even the people that are involved or starting to be involved in the solutions of this. It can't be just the schools. It can't just be the community. It can't just be policymakers. It has to be everybody at the table collectively, first of all, not pointing fingers and saying what the other person can do or the other entity can do, but what can we do collectively? What are some of the common things that we know? One of the things that we are, kind of struggling with is this, removing police from schools. And so for me, it's a no-brainer, but for some people, it's just like, well, we need them there to be safe. And so that's something that we are, struggling with. But the main thing is that, nobody can argue that there shouldn't be a disproportionate rate of Black children being referred to the juvenile justice system. That's where we have common ground. So let's start there.
Right.
And I'm really proud that G4GC is a supporter of Gwen's Girls.
Yes.
They're one of our grantee partners, and I love it.
Wonderful. Well,
and another thing I just want to quickly lift up is she brought up about sex trafficking. We do have our summit coming up, so a lot of information is on our website at www.gwensgirls.org. But our keynote speaker this year is Centoya Brown Long, and we wanted to uplift the conversation and to highlight that sex trafficking is happening and is happening in our communities. Our Black girls are missing and people are not looking for them. And so we need to start to really pay attention to that. And what are some of the preventative things that we can do in addition to, kind of helping our girls get out of that life?
Well, before we wrap up, I just want to just acknowledge everyone for your great insights. And, we kind of did this in a way. We started with the research. We started with the information. We identified the problem. We talked about policies and practices. We talked about legislative issues. Then we brought it on down to what's happening real life. And then we ended with what are possible solutions. We found out the information. Now what we're going to do about it, and how it's our collective responsibility to work together to integrate how we do business so we can transform the systems. I want to also just say, I want to make sure that there's a way to get a hold of that report that you said is going to be coming out. Can you tell us how we can access that?
It's going to be on our website on Monday. I have an embargo copy that I did share, but it'll be on our website on Monday.
Okay. And I know there were some other links that were shared with us. Wasn't there, Africa, about?
Yeah, I put a bunch of links in there about, linking to the work that our fabulous places have been engaged. So that's been in the chat as well. Absolutely.
Okay. It's just been so rich, our discussion, and I am saying enlightening and also empowering to me to continue to be an advocate unapologetically, and to use my position as superintendent. I'm the superintendent of Selma Unified School District in Central Valley. There are very few African-American superintendents that are female in the state of California. I think at one point I was one of 4 in the state. And so I am excited about this work, and I hear you when it comes to integrated approaches. It can't just be the educational system. It can't just be the juvenile justice system, because this is bigger than all of us. It's part of the fabric of America. So thank you so much for your contributions and for your information. And we're going to take a few minutes to ask for any other closing comments, and then Africa's going to tell us how to get back into the main session. Any last words?
Just that for all of the educators and school leaders and district leaders that are in the session with us, who want to be more involved in the work to end push out and more actively engaged in the promotion of materials and other support systems for that, you can visit pushoutfilm.com. There are tons of research-based supports, but also discussion guides and other materials that you might use in professional development opportunities and equity discussions in your district.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you.